Welcome back to the Ancient Critics Podcast.
Today we're going to be talking about the movie Amazing Grace, which was written by Michael Apted.
The story is about William Wilberforce and his close friend William Pitt.
Wilberforce!
And his close friend William Pitt, who abolished the slave trade in 1807. It's the story of how they grew together and as a parliament in order to abolish the slave trade. I ship it. So the movie Amazing Grace is a dramatized, character-driven story that focuses on William Wilberforce's moral struggles and political fight to end Britain's transatlantic slave trade, featuring John Newton, who's the author of the hymn Amazing Grace.
It also talks about his love life with Barbara Spooner, who is played by Romola Let's try that again. Romola Garai, which inspires him to take up the fight once more.
The abolishment of the British transatlantic slave trade was a complex, multi-decade process. It took very long and a lot of different petitions and fighting in the parliament.
Wait. Are we cutting this part out? Thank you. We can cut this part out. Great. Thank you, Jacob. Okay, got this. So let's talk about what the movie got right. Wilberforce is a central parliament figure during Great Britain at this time. The film correctly portrays William Wilberforce, who is a huge voice in leading the abolition bill.
It also correctly gets John Newton's transformation from one of the slave traders that took boats of slaves from Africa to Britain into a monk in one of the churches, which he started going crazy, having the amount of people's lives on his mind that he killed over his time of being a slave trader.
The campaign tactics that they used in the movie were also real. The film shows pamphlets, eyewitness testimonies, and moral appeals, which were really used by the abolitionists.
Now, even though they did a really good job on keeping everything pretty historically accurate, there are some parts where they got wrong. The hero narrative versus the broad movement is one area they went wrong. The film really leans heavily on like a great man story of how Wilberforce was just such a great guy and became this man of honor in every which way, where it wasn't just him that was a part of this and wasn't the only one that abolished it, but it was a big teamwork process.
They also really compressed the timeline just to make it fit in the time film, and although they used words like 20 years later or whatnot, it still seemed really short compared to the amount of time it took in real life.
Yeah, and then also the political complications were way underplayed in the movie because it was played off so easily, and it seemed like Wilberforce was always making an extra step to get ahead, where there were some moments in the real time and life that he had to step back or that their push didn't work whatsoever, and they didn't make any ground on abolishing the slave trade.
Yeah, it was a lot about how people were wrong and not a lot about the political ideas behind it.
Yeah, also the representation of the black abolitionists and victims of the slave trade. In the movie, they bring out a character named Zong, or just the Zong massacre, which was just a bunch of different killings and It's a massacre. Just lots of people died.
Well stated.
But the film doesn't really reference that very well, and how they also were a part in abolishing the slave trade, and how they kind of also pushed the tide because they had first-hand experiences, unlike the people in the parliament.
Thomas Clarkson's role in the movie was also underplayed as well. Clarkson did most of the legal work, which included interviewing sailors, collecting evidence, and organizing the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, efforts that the movie compressed into a smaller supporting role.
So, how should we use this film?
At a normal point, Amazing Grace is useful to introduce key people such as Wilberforce or Newton and the moral energy behind abolition. But I wouldn't use it as like a source to write a paper on because it's not fully historically accurate.
Yeah, and do we have any personal thoughts on the movie, how it went?
I thought it was great. The wigs were a little overdone, but you know.
Yeah, I think the movie was also really well made, and you could tell it was a lot more on the entertainment side because it was very entertaining, but also it brought out historical facts and you learned something about a historical time while still being entertained and enjoying a movie. Yeah, so one of the themes of the movies that we movie that we brought out was the morality versus the political, like, power inside the parliament. So Wilberforce was always fighting for more of the moral idea, where it is morally wrong to kidnap people from their country and make them do things and not get paid and just be slaves of people, and also end up killing millions during that process. But the parliament looked at it as a wealth issue, and the fact that if they took away the slave trade, they would no longer be able to continue to move forward as a country, or would have to slow down their movement a lot.
Perseverance in fighting injustice was also a huge theme in this movie. To continue a fight against injustice, even when odds seemed possible, that was hard for William Wilberforce, as he was peer pressured from all sides to just drop the bill.
Yeah, so the modern day connections to all this is how it affects people today. So William Wilberforce actually was the starter of the abolishment of the slave trade, but he died before it was fully abolished or fully gotten rid of by the British government. But he did start something that would forever change the world and how people are treated now.
It's also important to note that Great Britain was not the only country involved in the Atlantic slave trade. There were many other countries, including Spain and Portugal and the Netherlands.
And also, it symbolizes an inequality and human desire for the great abundance of wealth and power that, to a lot of the people in the British Parliament, they did not care very much about, like, the people or what it was doing to everyone, but more of the fact that they were making money and they were one of the most powerful countries in the world at the time, and they didn't really care how it was happening as long as they stayed ahead of everything.
Amazing Grace was written in 1772 by John Newton. This song reflects his personal journey from a rebellion and moral confused person to someone who was spiritually transformed.
He was born in 1725 to a seafaring father and raised amid mixed religious influences. Newton lived a very reckless life, filled with danger, near-death experience, and a lack of firm faith.
Despite repeatedly being spared from disasters that nearly caused him death, he refused to believe in God.
He was forced to join the Royal Navy in 1744, which later involved in the slave trade, in which is how he became a captain of one of the ships for the slave trade.
Newton participated in this because it was justified by a lot of Christians at that time.
Yeah, and later he was on a ship and a violent storm came in which almost destroyed his boat and everything with it, in which he came upon an island in Ireland and found the nearest church and gave his life to Christ again.
He described that hour in the storm as the first hour he believed.
Newton married Mary Catlett in 1750 and returned to sea as a changed man and eventually left sailing after a stroke.
While working in Liverpool, he deepened his Christian faith and felt called to be a minister.
Without a university degree, he was nonetheless ordained in 1764 and became curate of Olney, something
Really
like
nicely
that,
done.
where he befriended poet William Cowper, which is where the first version of Amazing Grace was written.
Decades later, Newton became a strong voice against the slave trade, influencing members of the Parliament Wilberforce and William Pitt to pursue abolition.
Yeah, and condemned the brutality that he had witnessed and the guilt that he sat with for many, many years.
Wilberforce eventually succeeded in passing the abolition bill in 1807.
Although Amazing Grace was not directly written as an abolition hymn, Newton's life story, moving the slave trader to outspoken abolitionist, has made the song a powerful symbol of redemption.
To end our podcast, we're gonna say a quote by Adam Smith. Wherever there is great property, there is great inequality. For one very rich man, there must be at least 500 poor.
Thank you for listening. Have a
Don't-
blessed day. Wear your seatbelt. Yeah, that's it.